probably need to get a suit.
You need to get a
For
suit. You don't.
infrequent date night.
Yeah. You don't own a suit. Is
Big
that what I just heard you
Montana
say?
energy to not even need a suit at rocks.
See, that's the thing. You definitely do cowboy boots and a vest and probably pull it off at a Bozeman
Yeah.
ball for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Pearl snaps. Maybe a bolo.
Yeah,
you're
bolo for
good.
sure. No, I don't know. Like I have blazers, but I've largely like gotten out of the suit game.
Yeah.
I think blazers plenty personally, and especially as civilians going to the ball, right? Like,
Put your little Marine pin on there.
you put a little
Garrett
pin on
wants
it.
me to wear my stack of ribbons, and
You want the folks
the
in
mini
uniform
ribbons.
to be the dress focus, right? Like nobody wants to see how good you can dress in civilian attire at the Marine Corps ball. We want to see guys in their blues.
I think that's super
true.
fair. I
That's
think
true.
Super fair.
Hold on. You're not looking forward to that phase of life, Brad, where you wear a dinner jacket with small ribbons on them?
I haven't gotten there, and I don't know if I ever will.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. I have a lapel pin of OIF, but I also have a lapel pin of just the National Defense Firewatch medal, which I used to wear
That's great.
all the time on the hill. And boy, that one broke necks. People would snap back and be like, "Wait, is he wearing the Firewatch medal?"
We all came from the generation where you enlist, and that is already on you.
Yeah, everybody got it.
Oh yeah,
Everybody gets it
Go up
right.
and you
So
have two things on the stack.
that's right. But it's not true anymore. That doesn't happen. That's
Right. Which makes
surprising.
it even more fun because it makes everyone, particularly veterans of our age, will see it and like we'll have that conversation immediately. They're like, "Oh, it's the medal everyone has," and then they go, "Oh, wait,
Yeah.
everyone doesn't have it anymore."
Yeah.
That was just our era.
Garrett's a big fan of just rocking the pizza box
I am.
Bold move.
as the dog whistle. As like that's the little dog whistle to get the conversation going, and I think that's pretty strong.
Yeah, especially because I've never had a pizza box in my life. You know what I mean?
I also have it, shockingly.
I think I was like at some point, like I'm too senior to even like need to go to the range anymore. But I think I had like one of the 5th award, 6th award little things under the expert badge. I'm not bragging here, but I'm not a bad shot.
I think I only qualified twice in my entire Marine Corps career.
It was definitely one of those things where like if you did not shoot expert, it was expected that you're going back to the range.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, you were getting expert.
Yeah. That's Brad, you're an engineer, combat engineer by background, right? Yeah. So like the combat arms kind of arena, which I always kind of like lumped in combat engineers, right? Like there was a threshold. Like you're either an expert or you're not in the unit, right? Like there's, and you're going back to the range on repeat with the first sergeant eventually if you need to, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and yeah. Well, we're doing a ball on Saturday evening. Brad, you're going to see me in no kidding mess dress, which is going to be.
I'm excited. Excited for that.
Given that I'm still actually in, I even went and got a haircut today. I don't know if that shows, but I got.
Is your boat cloak going to arrive in time?
My wife begged me to get a boat cloak, and I was like,
There's still time.
I will get killed in the parking lot if I show up in a boat cloak.
I've only seen one once.
I was going to say that's such an infrequent dress item. That would actually be pretty strong.
That seems like 8th and I, like the Marines at 8th and I probably have cloaks, and nobody else does. Nobody else should. That's kind of it's what's the other uniform item that the trench coat, right? Isn't there a trench coat as a uniform?
Yeah, those are
item?
issued.
They're issued. That's right. I got one issued too.
Mine got issued. Enlisted some.
Yeah, and I wore it a few times as a joke, like civilian out on town, and it was amazing. I think I actually went and got one of those like $3 Oceanside haircuts, and I wore a trench coat in for the haircut.
Which don't exist anymore because I was just in Oceanside a month ago. It's like $25 at minimum.
What?
No, and that was with a military discount. The dude asked me like straight up if I was rocking a beard, hair, but it's like, oh yeah, you're a vet. I'll give you the military discount. It's not a discount.
Next thing you'll tell me is that Oceanside used car dealerships have reasonable APRs.
I feel like the density of used cars dealerships out there are definitely dwindling. Like it's now more 5-star Michelin restaurants than it is used car dealerships.
Yeah, that's
It's wild.
That North County used to be like that hidden gem of affordable
commercial real estate. No longer.
With that, welcome to the Go Rodeo podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Smith. joined by regular co-host Simon Kuhn, and joined by guest co-host and hopefully long time future collaborator Brad Palm, fellow Marine and Chief Operating Officer, co-founder at a cyber company called Dreadnode, who lives here in town in Bozeman, Montana. One of the best places on the planet. Don't tell anybody. We don't have room for them. But Brad, thanks for joining us. And
I appreciate it.
Maybe just as an on-ramp for listeners who may not know you, can you give us the 90-second, the 120-second version out of it? I'd take as many seconds as you'd like.
I got 90 seconds.
Okay,
seconds.
do it. Hit it.
Sure. Yeah, so Dreadnode is an offensive AI company. We definitely focus on top-tier red teams, government, venture model companies is kind of like who we service with our platform. And I think, we might get into this a little bit, but, slapping AI onto whatever domain expertise you have has become kind of the flavor of, let's call it the year at least. But our team is backed by data scientists and researchers that spent pretty much their careers in leveraging artificial intelligence in different workflows, training models. So we are NatSec focused, supporting customers over their mission partners. And it's an exciting time to be in this space. I came out of the military, got into offensive security, entrepreneurship, starting companies here in Bozeman. And I think there's a massive amount of uplift that we're seeing on the work that we do. We're 10xing, 100xing as a seasoned operator. And I think that's kind of like what everybody's pie in the sky idea is of what uplift looks like. So we have a lot of fun with it, work with great partners. We're happy to be kind of loosely around the Rocky Mountain West region, but we're kind of eyeing that building that you're in. So who knows, maybe we'll be office mates here shortly, we'll see.
It's a great building. And
it is.
We would love office mates like you guys. So slapping AI on a company, we Reveal has the domain name of revealtech.ai, which I think
noticed.
actually, I think the .ai it got us a few extra bucks in the last couple of venture financing rounds, in the pre-money, which was thank you and well deserved and all that stuff. Thank you to the investors. But I found out that .ai is actually the nation of, is it Antigua? Is it anyway? It's like the domain for.
They're making bank off that.
What is it? Is it? It's the country code for Anguilla. Sorry, Anguilla, which is a British overseas territory in the Caribbean, and so visiting our website actually, for certain of us in the industry, maybe you as a cyber guy, all of a sudden throws up all these red and orange flags about like, oh my gosh, they're all their website traffic is going through Anguilla or whatever, and what are they doing? Are they offshoring their operations to the Caribbean or something? But anyway, that notwithstanding, I think it did give us a little bit of uplift in our last pre-money.
Are you guys incorporating quite a bit of AI into the product at this point?
I think that's an aggressive statement, right? Like we have an eye toward automation, certainly.
Yep.
And there are forms of AI in quotes, AI in the form of, machine learning underpinnings to some of our analytic models. And we want to relieve the human operator engaging with our technology from the cognitive burden that, multi-step, manually intensive workflows often bring. So I would put it mostly in the category of just automation and, delivering a seamless consumer-like software application experience to end users. But there's certainly some AI under the hood. But it's not
Gotcha.
It's not like a language model based, chatbot or, intelligent wingman type thing, at least not yet. Who knows if that ends up featuring more and more over time. It undoubtedly will, but it isn't necessarily a core value proposition of the company. But that's not true for you guys. You actually deploy AI in red teaming scenarios for cyber defense and offense, right?
Yeah, there's two flavors. There's hacking on AI, which is usually considered AI red teaming at this point, which is trying to leverage the model as an attack surface to do some follow-on activity. Like usually the model is paired with some business process where it represents an attack surface that is interesting to an attacker. The other piece is hacking with AI, and that is the uplift scenario. I think we're more closely tied to the uplift scenario at this point, where we're looking for agentic uplift. We're looking for small models purposefully tuned to help out in offensive actions. But yeah, that data sets, custom small models, we kind of run the range there of what you'd expect out of probably a more proper AI lab, just domain expertise focus on offensive cyber.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense to me. Are you guys encountering, and maybe this will help us segue into maybe the balance of the conversation, but are you encountering the same sorts of like headwinds to software and AI adoption in this national security market that many of us are? In other words, the department, or the many agencies that are part of the national security enterprise are just frankly not good at buying software or buying services and in the kind of the new 21st century Silicon Valley style mode. Has that been your experience too?
I think that's a fair take. I think one of the ways in which we danced around that as a startup was leveraging the relationship with InQtel, who was going to get an interested, buyer or mission partner on the receiving end of this technology. But you're usually working with and partnering with folks that have an R&D carve out allocated towards the technology that they're looking at. So in this case, we're largely dealing with folks that have an AI mission that they're tasked with exploring, like, does this provide real opportunity for us? Are we missing out by not leveraging this in operations, and then working with a partner to deliver them capability uplift and at least run the trials and the demos on it. We're very much drinking our own Kool-Aid, as you can imagine, but we're well past proof of concept and into production releases of agents, and then thinking through agent life cycle, which is you build something, it does something impactful, you will have that around for some time in your operational toolkit. What happens when models change over time and get better? What happens when agents harness changes over time? And so there's a life cycle to having something like that in production. So I think we find folks at different stages of the crawl, walk, and run adoption of AI into operations. And I think we found that there are some fast movers out there. We like working with those. Obviously, that's kind of like our speed that we want to maintain with folks is early adopters are down to do the R&D efforts, get something to production, and then leverage it to get that real world feedback. But I think for as many conversations we have as people that are motivated to explore this space, there's some that are just not quite ready. They're fearful of, guardrails for agents. How much is the human in the loop versus how much is automated, so that kind of automated continuum. So there's plenty of hurdles to clear within a government buyer, NatSec buyers, but we found good uptake so far, promising signal, and then promising success with those mission partners.
Maybe to round out this kind of intro phase, talk to us about stage of company and maturity, maybe in terms of venture life cycle, maybe in terms of headcount, or maybe in terms of age of company. Maybe give us some of those ballparks, and then that'll maybe round us out.
Yeah, so Dreadnode is, we did our Series A just over a year ago. Series A kind of brought us in at about 15 million in raise. 2-year-old company. We formed October of 23. In that time that we put our for sale sign up, we basically had customers kind of lined up to do engagements with our team. Platform was not built yet. Platform was kind of in its infancy. So a lot of that was services through a fledgling platform. And over time, that's become largely platform first. Services as a forward deployed engineer model, a white glove model, that type of thing. But I think we're in this place where services partnered with platform for a very technical offering is the name of the game.
Yeah.
And we just can't move away from that. So we definitely embraced it. We won't be a pure product play, I don't think, for some time. And I think, honestly, if somebody is out there in the market that's shilling, that's already kind of putting us in a negative connotation here, but they're out there saying that the agent can do the thing and just push button, go deploy. We're still early for that. And news should be indicative of it. But folks are just leaning into this space. It is definitely early adopter territory.
Yeah. I mean, all that makes sense. The forward deployed engineer concept is one that we are spinning up on the Reveal side as well. We have a number of forward deployed engineer types in our customer ecosystems. And that's very similar to, or maybe best exemplified in the Palantir model over the last 20 years. And we'll come back to Palantir, I think, in a couple of different ways over the course of this conversation. But Man, that's awesome. And we're a couple years older than you, and we've been going gray in that startup trench line for longer than you have, at least with Dreadnode. I know you've been doing other stuff before that, but uh, good on you. I mean, it's a worthy fight. And the cyber crossed with AI has got to be kind of like both riding the wave of AI, this new thing, but also this evergreen market opportunity around cyber. That those things in my mind will never go away, and you guys are incredibly well positioned in that way. Let's take maybe a big strategic, call it, step back and talk a bit about geopolitics stuff and get into the balance of conversation. So, Simon, we saw this week the announcement of a generational investment, I think they're calling it, in the Canadian Armed Forces, and an increased spending profile over the next many years for the Canadian national security apparatus. I think it's a boost of something like 10 or 15%. They spend already quite a bit of money given the population size in Canada. But talk to us a little bit about what's driving this, like why this is happening outside of their affiliation with NATO and a commitment to increase spending alongside its NATO partners. What's going on in Canada?
So this would actually
sorry, the 51st state. What's going on in the 51st state, Simon?
Don't threaten me with a good time. I don't think people understand what the 51st state would mean for American politics. But
you'd be happy, I think.
Yeah. No, it would be a massive influx of liberals. That would overwhelm.
Perfect.
Yeah. So lots of American states would lose seats in the House of Representatives if Canada suddenly became part of our population. But
it's also not going to happen, and it's silly. And
it also
it was said with a very large tongue and a very large cheek.
But it is interesting to see how the new Canadian government, right, under Carney, is arranging itself and where it's laying out policy priorities. And one of them is this recently announced defense spending. I think it's a total of $64 billion. It's $9 billion higher than their defense budget last year. It would push them past their NATO requirements. They contributed more than 2% GDP at that level. But once you get past that, you start to hear just a lot of very common refrains that we've seen with other international partners and even here in the U.S., right? It's investing in their industrial base in order to onshore manufacturing capability. It is specific preference for Canadian defense firms to reduce their reliance on America.
Mm-hmm.
So even as we are, asking these partners to take on a greater share of that collective security burden, they're simultaneously saying, okay, yeah, but if we're going to do that, we're going to make sure that money and that get is coming back around to our domestic coffers and not just buying American tech.
That's interesting because one could, from a very low resolution perspective, say, oh, this is just a reaction to a relatively aggressive American posture with the Trump administration and kind of like stressing or straining friendships. But one could also say this is a kind of a nationalist, populist move, independent of anything else in Canada, that wants to reindustrialize for its own needs and its own kind of resiliency or its own protectionism or whatever. So I think that's quite interesting. I'll note that over the 5-year period where they're making this I think it's an $80+ billion investment over 5 years. At least this is.
So that's the plan. The $9 billion for next year, I believe, is like that's happening.
Okay,
but the larger 5-year plan is not something that's like committed to law yet.
Sure. So the plan calls for 80 billion, 81 billion or so over a 5-year period. It sounds like they're committed at least for the next fiscal year. I'll note that in that 5-year period, $11 billion is earmarked for cyber and digital purposes. So, Brad, licking your lips, I'm sure. Canadian customers on the rise. But this is also alongside, I'll call it a general trend line, perhaps, toward nationalism and protectionism and populism within many Western countries, either as a result of, the new Trump administration dynamic or just kind of the nature of the world as it evolves. President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China have, over the past decade at least, maybe longer, been building internal resiliency measures to become less dependent on outside supply chains, and they're becoming much more domestically resilient and self-reliant in that way. And I think this is just a trend line in that direction generally, whether you can attribute it to Trump or not Trump or whatever, do with that what you will. What we are seeing as a manifestation in our industry is that there's a potentially a growing anti-American technology sentiment from the buyer set. In other words, the Canadians want, domestic defense equipment manufacturers to be given, priority. We've heard this from NATO partners inside and out and beyond the Five Eyes partnership about, buy domestic, buy local, buy European, buy whatever. And the U.S. is seen as either not a trustworthy, partner in doing that, or it comes with too many strings attached or whatever. And I think that is a natural trend line given the dynamic of the kind of the world order as it shifts and changes right now. Are you seeing that, Brad, in your observation? Yeah. I don't know how much international business you do right now, but assuming that you do some, or at least you've poked around in the international space, what are you encountering out there?
This was like the topic of conversation yesterday when we were kind of engaging with a Canadian customer, but there's a nationalism around where your AI models are being served from.
Interesting.
Countries are developing their models specific to their regions. And so I almost look at, that trend line is probably a larger one of like supply chain management, ensuring that you have access to, let's call it a critical resource. And so in this case, we could say tech, maybe more generally defense tech, is considered to be, this critical resource for this nation to be successful moving into the future. And they're going to control the supply chain for that delivery of it into their corresponding partners in the government. So I think we are seeing that message loud and clear with partners, whether it's, Singapore being an AI first nation, working on models that are specific to their region, Southeast Asia, UK, having strong investments in their AI labs, AI safety institutes, and frontier models that are being produced over there, or just the US. I think folks are just a little bit gun shy, or at least they're aware enough to know that we can kind of get into this a little bit, but when you engage with a frontier model company that is not within your country and might not have national interests aligned, you're going to be shipping data, intellectual property to somebody that is providing inference as a service and could basically do quite a bit to train, post-train, or harvest that information. And we're right now the largest vacuum that's hoovering up information in the room with our frontier model providers. So it's a nationalist issue, for sure.
I could even see your domain as being the most sensitive to this dynamic, where
wildly.
As the world has digitized over the past couple of decades, and as much of a nation's crown jewels, so to speak, live in digital form in secure, relatively, or maybe not very secure environments, or secure environments, or whatever, and certainly doctrine, communications, all kinds of stuff, personal information, all that stuff. It doesn't surprise me that that would be a contested space in the in this domain. It sounds like you're encountering that as well. But are you still able to generate business, and you just have to partner with local frontier model developers? Okay, so you still have you still have an avenue for generating and delivering value overseas, but it's not okay.
And we've kind of gone in with this design decision from day one for our platform. Largely, folks are deploying our platform on premise, and they own their data, and they get to select their pairing of their model, and that model will usually be specific to the region that they're operating in. So we represent a bit of a neutral playing ground for, they can achieve the objectives they need to with our agents. They can choose the models under the hood, and they can ensure that that data integrity is being protected, where it's not just being siphoned out somewhere. In a lot of our operations, from a top tier red teaming perspective, you don't get to ship a bunch of traffic outside of these networks. You want to try and do things locally customized, and you don't want to produce a large signature. You definitely don't want to be generating to OpenAI or whomever your inference provider is off the shelf. Hey, I'm hacking this X country network, and this is my next move in the chess match here. Can you help me generate the next 5 commands for this target system?
Right.
That's not going to happen, right? So
right.
Yeah, discretion is the name of the game. Custom small models to support offensive cyber operations. Our platform had to be built with that in mind day one, knowing that our industry just will not ship sensitive information across data boundaries willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Very discerning. Yeah.
And that's governed probably both by like corporate strategy, policy, whatever, internal to the technology.
At this point, it's policy for sure, and just best practice.
There's some amount of regulation there as well. GDPR in Europe, right? That prevents data transference and data storage, and in the general sense for European, for EU. I think that's a pan EU item. But yeah, I mean,
you got to
regulatory environment, sure.
You got to figure this is the least regulated time that it's ever going to be. Like a lot of the regulatory models have not caught up to the tech yet. So this is going to continue to shift pretty quickly. And, I'm sure we're going to touch on this when we talk a little bit about the recent Shyam Sankar interview, but this is one of the topics, right? It's how these companies, their own like moral framework within the company is now going to be a feature.
Yeah.
You're going to be asked and you're going to be required to talk about the morality of what your company does in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably always featured in the defense arena. I'm sure there were ethical and moral discussions, at the
I think it depends on when. I don't think there were ethical or moral discussions at the Ford plant. No,
you don't think there were you don't think there were no discussions about
we didn't even have discussions about dropping the bomb. Like when we were developing the nuclear bomb, the second it was ready, there wasn't like a hey, go, no go decision. Like it was just like, all right, pick a target, it's ready. Like we didn't build it for shits and giggles. So I really do think that like particularly as we got into the American hegemonic world order is when you start to get into that conversation of like wars of choice. And World War II did not, I think, to most or any feel like a war of choice. Which is freeing in a lot of ways,
Well, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't still be having ethical, moral discussions about, about things, even if the conclusion you reach is that this is an entirely moral and ethical.
I don't think anyone was interviewing Henry Ford to ask him, would you be willing to build tanks for a Republican president as opposed to FDR, right? Like that wouldn't have been a question.
Also, he's well known to have some Nazi sympathies. So like,
there's some leanings that were not great.
There's some conflicting items in there, but maybe let's use that as the segue. Ross Douthat from the New York Times on his podcast interviewed Shyam Sankar, who's the chief technology officer of Palantir, also recently minted or turned into or whatever. Somebody snapped her fingers, sheep dipped it into, the lieutenant colonel ranks in the Army Reserve. I'll just say, I don't think the Marine Corps would do that, but that's just me.
We're never given. I don't know. I don't think we're going to just be handing those EGAs out anytime soon.
No. I think there's a reason that the Army Reserve opened its arms nice and wide on that one. But nothing against my Army brothers and sisters, but different service. So I've obviously got some salty sentiments about the officer commission that he and a few others were handed, but he did cover this ground in that interview with Ross Douthat. It was very specifically on the topic of Palantir building data management, data solutions that are supporting a variety of different American executive branch agencies, to include Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is obviously all over the news and has been for many months at this point. And Ross was prodding Shyam on the topic of, how do you feel about the politics and rightness or wrongness or the ethics and the morals of supporting mass deportations? It was very much, it was and like, read that however you will. It's New York Times, podcast. It's going to have like a New York Times inflection on it, and they've got a perspective, which is totally fine.
Well, Ross is not carrying the traditional New York Times political perspective, though.
I think that's true, but Stockholm syndrome over there. I don't know.
He is one of the more principled conservative voices that exists.
I really appreciate. I really appreciate Ross. I do think that he was likely feeling pressure from the New York Times editorial board to probe on this as a topic, but it wasn't center stage the entire conversation. I think that it was a wide-ranging conversation, and there is this kind of ethical and moral dynamic to being in this industry. And Palantir has been bushwhacking for the rest of us ahead of us for 10 or 15 years at least. I mean, almost 20 years. And they're an incredibly valuable enterprise as a result, right? They surpassed in the not too distant past, they surpassed Lockheed Martin in market cap, and they're a wildly successful and incredibly valuable company doing, I think, incredible work. That being said, Shyam said very clearly, soldiers want and need Ironman suits, and I've had to like, rewind a couple times and listen to it a few times. He actually said this, and it really bothered me. And I know this is, I'll hand the mic off to Simon here in a second, but because I know that he gets similarly piqued on this topic. But like, there's nothing that I can think of as a called a former, tactical unit commander and infantryman and enlisted infantryman at that way back in the day. There's nothing that I want less than an Ironman suit to be like handed to me or developed for me and occupy kind of my tactics, techniques, and technology thinking. Like, I wanted a few other things before an Ironman suit, to be honest. Simon keeps saying this, and I've adopted it as a talking point, but I want lighter body armor, right? Like, I want better night vision optics. I want like a weapon that cycles ammunition faster. I want radios that actually talk to my joint partners. Like, I want to be able to talk to my, adjacent Army unit on tactical radio networks and not have to use hand and arm signals and smoke signals to talk.
I want to put my IFAC on the left side of my vest instead of the right side of my vest.
Yeah.
I don't even know. You were skipping. Yeah, you see that? That makes me wonder.
It is.
Who are
you're
you
just
guys
skipping rounding the
talking to?
bases.
Yeah. And like, and this, I think this ties all the way back to that sheep dip question of like, what parts of the military is he talking to at the level that he's at, and like the political conversations he's having? Because even coming from like a place of good faith and really trying your hardest at this problem, if you talk to a requirements person versus an acquisition person versus a PEO leadership versus an actual end user versus a lower enlisted or a field grade officer end user, you're going to get different answers about what a soldier wants.
That's right.
And so I'm super hesitant for anyone to say, this is what soldiers want and this is what soldiers need. I'm like, oh, fascinating. Because I remember, being in Fallujah and guys buying their own dragon skin armor, but that wasn't the universal opinion of my unit. That was like 3 guys that were gear nerds. And the most of us were like, I just really want to move my pouches around. That's kind of all I want right now. That's my first order list of problems, is like, I need a place to put my dip, and I want my hands to be able to like touch the sides of my body. I had that big coffin Kevlar vest that they introduced after the IOTV
with the collar and the
you were just like
piece.
you're just like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Yeah,
like
the
all we
MTBR.
wanted was to not do that.
That was almost like fleece line, the MTBR. That thing was massive, and it
And it
was
had
one
the
where
quick
fleece for the
release.
desert.
Oh, the quick release
It was just like crazy.
Yeah, it was bizarre. Yeah, I can see the lapse. So for those that don't know, there was a time where IEDs, improvised explosive devices, were such the big threat, particularly in Iraq, that the DoD decided we just need way more Kevlar and way more armor. So they up-armored everyone. And when that happened, they're like, oh, they're too heavy. If they catch on fire, they're going to die. So they built a wire into it that you could pull that would disassemble your entire armored kit. And then it just turned into 19-year-olds pulling each other's cables to disassemble their stuff whenever you were doing anything.
Yeah, even on patrol. So, lest we forget, 13 years ago, there was a U.S. Army program spun up called, I think it was an Army program, Talos, the Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit, Talos, nicknamed the Ironman suit. This was a program. And it came up because, a lot of kind of executive or senior uniformed energy bubbled up as the result of probably some combat fatalities. I seem to remember Admiral McRaven of SOCOM being one of the vocal champions of a project or a program kind of like this. And it ended up being a joint acquisition task force. So it got a lot of joint energy around it. But it was canceled in 2019 after spending, I'm just going to guess, tens of, maybe even lower order, hundreds of millions of dollars on development. And here are the big 3 reasons, according to this article that I'm reading. First is power source, right? You could not get a power source that was light enough and could endure long enough for any amount of mission accomplishment, and certainly wasn't like a wieldy power source. The second was weight and mobility, which has got to be like the main one, right? Like, it's simply not an ergonomic thing to walk around in a powered exoskeleton, right? it was too heavy and bulky, I think, was the feedback, and that's being corroborated by this set of articles that I'm reading. And then integration complexity, right? Like you have so many other systems that soldiers, special operators, Marines are already carrying.
The radios still don't talk.
That's right. The radios still don't talk. Like, how are you going to get it? So anyway, Shyam, you're wrong. You're wrong. Nobody in the Army actually wants an Ironman suit. Like, solve a different problem. Solve a much more tactically relevant and real problem. Like,
and I want to
like
touch
counter
on
US. I don't want an exoskeleton.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to get killed by the next FPV drone coming across the flot. That's what I don't want. I don't.
And that's there's two big misses in his line of thinking here. And the first is like the classic retort is, well, you put money into these things, these R&D efforts, so things get lighter and batteries get better and blah, 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 blah. That has never happened. Think about all of the electronics and power and things that we use. None of them are like, oh, thank God the DoD put $1 billion into batteries and made batteries lighter for all of us. That era is over. Apple went and made your batteries lighter. It's cell phones and commercial compute that is pushing the envelope of all of those technologies. In the last 30 years, there's not a single DoD soldier-worn tech kit that has pushed the edge of these tech. It's just they continue to lag behind. They're always behind the curve. It's bizarre.
Maybe if Anduril and Palantir collaborated on like an Eagle Eye crossed with Ironman suit offering that included, and that's
their pitch now, right?
That included.
I mean, they're not partnering, but
that included a rip it pouch where it would open it and deliver it straight to the mouth.
Yeah,
without burdensome, cognitive, load on the operator. But maybe then we can get on board.
But to your point on the drones, right? Like, while you were doing this, while you were dumping all this money into what you decided soldiers needed,
right?
The reality of the battlefield took commercial technology and commercial tech and came up with an actual thing that soldiers could use, and they just did it.
And they just did it
with a fraction of the money and a fraction of the time.
They just did it.
And like all of that happened. So like we keep throwing money down this well, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. The more time I spend looking at these problems, the more I think the solution needs to be more about the structure of how we do business and less about prescriptively building tech for X or Y thing. You just need to figure out how to iterate fast and push to the maximum extent possible acquisition and resources down to those lower levels where the fighting happens, because the fighters are going to tell you something different.
So this is, I dropped an item in my LinkedIn post about this yesterday, but doesn't this just underscore the idea that the loudest voices in many of these thought leadership positions are often people who are very disconnected from the end user environment? In other words, you have a sheep-dipped lieutenant colonel who has literally never worn a uniform until a couple of months ago and has never, ever been in a combat scenario, expounding to a podcast host in New York City about what is needed on the modern battlefield, right? Like, I mean, that is the epitome of disconnect from the actual end user experience and the requirements and demands and needs and wants, for that matter, of that environment. So, I mean, that gets really deep under my skin. So Shyam Sankar, sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Sankar, with all due respect, you're wrong. And also I appreciate everything that you and Palantir are doing, but like, come on, like this is not the way of the future.
There's a real cultural challenge here, I think, as we're blending several very significant cultures, because it is founder culture, right? It is the way that we treat tech executives and tech CEOs and their like outsized input in national conversations mixed with now national security conversations. And I'll tell you, I was already mad as a policy staffer watching random lieutenant colonels, retire and then become a talking head on TV, and suddenly they're an expert on geopolitics. I'm like, hey, buddy, you spent 20 years on Camp Lejeune. You actually have no idea what you're talking about when it regards to Taiwan or Indo-PACOM, because you were at Okinawa. You don't know a single extra language. You have no real expertise beyond being in a Marine Corps formation. That doesn't make you a geopolitics expert. So now you're jamming all these problems together, right? Because it is, if you're going to be in the defense space, you're required to pontificate on geopolitics and what's happening on the battlefield. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to sell. right? No one is really interested in buying from the humble founder, as far as I can tell, or it's rare if it's happening.
Brad, did you get an invite to this defense industry executive talk that Secretary of War Hegseth is going to be giving? He released a memo, right? And this is a memo ahead of a conversation that is going to happen at some point with industry executives. Did you get an invite? I didn't. I'll just say it out loud.
I did not, but maybe we're too humble. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm expecting my invite to show up any minute now. I know for sure I've got a lot of great stuff that the Secretary of War wants to know about. So it should just be any day now.
Maybe to put a bow on this, but we just look at the acquisition cycle from GWAT and think about all the different improvements we try to make for load carrying operations in deserts. MRAP's a good, that's always touted as a success story of, rapid fielding of technology to the battlefield. But we designed the wrong backpack and immediately Marines started gutting the frame and putting, Ilbies back on it or, just old school rucks. But
yeah, I carried an Alice pack in combat.
Yeah, like an Alice pack on
Vietnam era Alice pack. Yeah.
To get around some silly requirement that somebody made somewhere and then force down kind of this procurement pipeline. But anything that is tech related that's put in the hands of Marines, it will be destroyed in probably less than a day is usually the finding. Just our minesweepers were just ridiculous to kind of field that stuff. So I struggle with the technical acumen and consumption for ground combat troops there's a huge disconnect in what's going to be adopted and actually leveraged on the battlefield.
I think there's two disconnects because obviously, as I'm sure everyone on this call is aware, the 19-year-olds that are joining the Marine Corps right now have a very different type of technical expertise than the sergeant majors who are in the Marine Corps. So you're hitting it twice in that your senior leaders in the military have what we would consider functionally little technical expertise, and they are outclassed by their juniors in a very specific type of way, right? Personal cell phones and computers and all that stuff. Like the younger you are, the more technically capable you are. And then you add that layer of the Marine, let's just say talent for equipment destruction. Even for equipment that they like, right? Like I remember we used to hear all the time, I don't know if it's still a thing, but you used to hear about the mag tab in the Marine Corps, which was like a tablet that was going to be a tactical tablet. And I was like, yeah, if you want to see an infantryman kill a man with a tablet, please give him one, because that's the only thing he's going to use it for. I cannot imagine an 0311, let me pull out my tablet real quick and do some tasks while I'm here in the firefight. No way. It's a brick.
Well, MagTab is not as prolifically deployed or fielded as maybe that program manager would like to tout it. And I'll just make this note on the eve of the 250th birthday of your United States Marine Corps, that Marines still don't have tactical mobile devices, even though the U.S. Army's National Guard and Reserve components do have them fielded as part of the Net Warrior kit. We are nearing 20 years post-advent of the smartphone and 10 to 15 years since the advent of ATAC and the adoption of mobile devices and the soft component. How is it possible that the U.S. Marine Corps does not have
perfect example of the disconnect between the different layers of the military, right? I mean, that's right. The Marine Corps, in its force modernization priorities, has had some very interesting and some things that I disagree with.
Yep.
However, they don't seem to be prioritizing the infantry fighting force at all.
No.
Their priorities are we need to get these ship-to-shore missiles, and we need to get these amphibious ships, and we need to figure out the sensor loop. And I'm like, in my head, I hear it. I'm like, that makes some level of sense pretty much across the board. However, at some point, a 19-year-old has to go stomp around on the ground and close with and destroy the enemy. Close with has to happen. What's the point of the organization? And I feel like a lot of that kit has been left behind in the classic Marine Corps resource struggle where you can't do everything.
Simon, have no fear. Your junior enlisted friends, my junior enlisted friends in the Marine Corps will shortly have a fully realized exoskeleton delivered by Palantir Anduril.
They're going to have their own cell phones is what they're going to have. They're just going to bring their own stuff.
Totally. I think that's true. Well, Brad, you mentioned acquisitions and innovation uptake and all that stuff. I think the meeting that we referenced a few minutes ago with Secretary Hegseth, speaking with or to or whatever, a number of industry executives, is intended to be aimed at the defense acquisitions process and streamlining it. So here are some key reforms that were identified in Secretary Hegseth's memo and the focus of his intended discussion. It's streamlined accountability and portfolio management. So this is a lot about delegating authority and placing accountable decision makers closer to the program execution. So I think that at least rhetorically is aimed at closing the gap between acquisition decisions and end user application and fielding. So that's interesting. It's maybe just rhetorical. We'll see. So portfolio acquisition executives are potentially taking the place of program executive offices, where it's much more about, a portfolio of capabilities aligned with mission types and integrating them across the operational spectrum. That's interesting. Performance and incentives for the acquisitions ecosystem. So performance scorecards for, programs. Simon, we've either talked about this on a previous podcast, or maybe it's just you and me riffing late at night, me a scotch in hand and you a Diet Coke. Oh, sorry, a Coke Heavy. Sorry,
yeah,
Coke Heavy. Coke Heavy.
I'm full flavor over here.
You are full flavor. That's how I describe you, actually, in social circles. My full flavor friend, Simon. Time indexed incentives. So I don't know quite what that means, but it's kind of like that's a time schedule performance incentive, right? Like a lot of times we see prime contractors going long and at all, taking out all the stops on trying to extend periods of performance and slow rolling the final stages of a RDT&E activity so they can stretch the contract out, and adopting more commercial practices like iterative capability development and using flexible contracting types. So DIU pioneered, David Rothside, a friend of ours, pioneered and invented and pioneered the commercial solutions opening as a streamlined way to sole source contracting activities with non-traditional players. And then I swear to God, this is the last big kind of item here on my list, but industrial base engagement. So this kind of aligns with that reindustrialization thing, that zeitgeist that we're seeing rise here and apparently in Canada and elsewhere. So reindustrializing, but it is aimed at unlocking private capital and inspiring and allowing for enhanced activity with private risk capital. And that's probably through additional mechanisms like funds matching programs we see with, AFWorks, their application to the cyber programs. We've got things like TACFI and StratFi, Army's Catalyst program, and a range of other items that are risk sharing and allow for public money to be doubled down on top of private risk capital in interesting technology categories. And then something called a 2 to production standard, meaning that instead of getting like vendor locked on one vendor's offering in a category, to always have at least 2 and potentially more vendor options so that you maintain competition in the technology category, competition at the program level, and then reducing price for the government buyer. Those are just kind of like general Econ 101 principles as applied to this market. So anyway, sorry for the ramble there, but that's the tightest summary that I could come up with on this memo and the discussion focus. Does any of that get you interested, Brad? Or are you excited or inspired? Are you dubious? How do you feel?
Skeptical.
Yeah, I think we have a healthy amount of skepticism knowing that these initiatives have been in place for a while. I think we recognize that FAR doesn't move fast enough, and then we find another iteration of OTAs or PIAs and different mechanisms in which ultimately the warfighter can get in their hands what they need to do the mission.
Right.
I would largely like just to see a government charge card get sent down to some procurement official next to the unit and buy the stuff they need. And I know that's also a bit like cavalier because we believe in standardization, all these other things, and only special units get special permissions like that. But at the end of the day, I think if the Ukraine war or any of these current conflicts provide, just some TTPs and best practices of just time to access what is on the market that's readily available to be put into the fight is the most important thing. And I think there's still probably a play for, these, I don't want to say waterfall type designs, but like complex builds probably deserve more complex plans and funding. I get it, but largely what we're talking about here is not solving rocket science for somebody to go out and close with, as Simon mentioned. It's I need something that's off the shelf, needs a little bit of refactor, and then I can put it into use to accomplish my mission. So I think there has to be some flexibility there. And just even running we sat inside of a Marquardt Syscom for a weapons systems testing unit that, even had challenges producing and procuring the tools that we need to go out and test systems effectively, even though we could rip them off the shelf and put them into our testing cycle right away.
Right.
And that's just a non-combat, scenario where even that is just massively frustrating. And oftentimes you're going to have to put a bid out there and you'll get something that is a competitive bid on what you actually want. And you end up with something that's substandard.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's healthy amount of skepticism that they're going to fix this overnight. I would love to see it though.
The phrase that I keep hearing, and I think this is the right one, is developing and acquiring and fielding at the speed of relevance. And too often we buy tech for the last war in time for the next one, right? Like, and that's not, absolutely. And that's the relevance gap right there. And I will say that I too am skeptical, but I'm grateful that this rhetorical energy is being sent out into the world. Like, you got to start someplace, and like for this to come from the secretary himself, right? And you got to believe that if the secretary's saying it, he's got DepSecDef, Feinberg, and all the other folks kind of underneath him lined up to support the initiative. And again, it could just be rhetorical, but it's the right direction, right? This is the right direction. Yeah.
I think I am generally supportive of the intent and like the energy here. But I mean, honestly, my first question is, who is going to be doing all of this? We have bled so many KOs and so many like bureaucrats at this point that I'm wondering who is going to be executing and who's going to be evaluated on all of it. It's the memo amounts to sticks and carrots, and that's great. Love to see new sticks and carrots, new ways of measuring folks as a means to like move this ball faster. Great. Who's going to do it, especially for shutdown? Like, we're announcing this thing mid-shutdown. There's not anybody at work. They're all barred from accessing their government emails to look at this good news.
Well, let's use that as a maybe a final topic and segue into that. Reveal and Dreadnode potentially, and many folks in our industry are growing increasingly frustrated with the government shutdown, which we all hoped would resolve much, much sooner than it might resolve at this point. And the very specific friction point that Dave Caudill mentioned in our podcast last week, which is the reality, is that there are tens of millions of dollars of contracting activity that have been teed up for months, and I would say at some level years, which are now prevented on the goal line from getting consummated and executed on contract because of government shutdown and furloughs and personnel shortfalls and some slice of misunderstanding at the KO or acquisitions kind of professional level about cyber reauthorization, cyber data rights, or cyber rights as it pertains to contract vehicles that are out there, and a whole range of other things. But this is it may be directionally correct, this whole conversation track, the Hegseth memo and speed of relevance and whatever. And maybe the Gov shutdown, maybe this is doing some things to, I don't know, encourage lean operating or something. Like, I'm trying to find some silver linings in here, but the short message for me is, man, this is freaking chaos, and it's bad. It's bad for us. It's bad for plenty of other non-traditional contractors. I suspect that it's even bad for the deep-pocketed prime contractors who build in a huge amount of buffer into their operating models and are rewarded for doing that in the public markets with giant contracts from the government. So anyway, this is not good. Simon, you gave us a forecast of November 24th as a no later than timeline for Congress sorting out a resolution to the shutdown. Is that still your forecast?
That's still my guess. I don't know about no later than, as there's no backstops here, right? It is like true. Anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's. You've seen a little bit of progress in this last week, specifically on finding some paths forward. Mostly you're going to see this news characterized as fracturings in like the Dem coalition. So you really, right, at the end of the day, you need 8 Democrats in the Senate, 7 Democrats in the Senate to break with their party and vote with the Republicans. The big math here for everybody is who thinks they're winning the shutdown? Who thinks that the other side is getting blamed for the shutdown? And I think that I couldn't tell you. I don't know what the popular theorem is because everyone seems to be in their own version of it. I do know that after last night's election, and you saw, Democrat sweeps in multiple states, including, several flips from red to blue. I've seen the news reports like, hey, these are blue states who voted for blue candidates, maybe, but there was a Republican governor and a Republican lieutenant governor in Virginia, and now there's not. So I don't know if it's quite as straight ahead as it's blue to blue here. But I think it buoys the spirits of the Democrats that, like, clearly the Americans are not, the electorate is not blaming Democrats so aggressively that they're unwilling to vote for them. That's the message for sure that, like, the Democratic Party is taken away from last night. So unfortunately, I think it's going to cause folks to dig in a little bit. I think we're just getting into the painful portion of the shutdown. It takes a couple months for the government to start really grinding to a halt. The first month of a shutdown really isn't that painful. Most Americans don't feel any of this. If you're not on SNAP benefits or a federal employee, you're not really feeling the shutdown yet. Like, it's not really impact. Maybe you had a vacation planned, or maybe you needed to fly to Houston, but that just started getting painful.
You're probably not even feeling it if you're reliant on SNAP benefits, because that was partially funded to tide things over, right? So even that vulnerable population isn't quite feeling it. Simon, last note here. Your guy, Zoran Mamdani, won the New York City mayoral race.
My guy.
Yeah. Oh, is he not? He's not your guy?
I mean, I'm a Democrat. I'm not scared to say that I'm a Democrat, and he is the Democrat mayor of New York
I'll
City.
just say that he's a Democrat.
Yeah, he's a Democrat. There's no two ways about it. He's a Democrat.
He's a different kind of Democrat, though.
There
right?
was Cuomo's brother was on the news, as he often is.
Yeah, Chris Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo has he's got a brother. But he was on the news, and he said something. He's like, "Hey, the one-line takeaway is that the Democrat won in New York City."
Yes,
and that's not shocking, right? Like, it was always going to be whoever got voted to be mayor of New York City was going to be a Democrat, and the voters of New York decided who the Democrat was, really, in this scenario.
Sure.
And that's always been my big concern. Is, without getting too political on the podcast here, if the voters picked him, that's our guy.
Right.
I a long time ago took a job as a Democrat in the Senate and have since then been a Democrat. And part of that comes with knowing that constituents can elect somebody to be a Democrat, and therefore we're on the same team by the dearth of the mess that is democracy.
Yeah.
It is so I don't think that New York City is either about to collapse or probably not either going to enter a golden age, but Zoran's definitely the Democrat that won.
I saw, we can wrap on this note. I saw a clip from the Saturday Night Live cold open this last weekend. Saturday Night Live, not a particularly relevant show anymore.
It has its moments.
Maybe it never was or whatever. But Shane Gillis portrayed Sliwa, and anyway, it was a funny cold open. But one of the Zoran Mamdani like debate lines was, "I'm gonna do X and Y and Z, free buses and whatever, all this stuff." And he's like, "Can I actually do that? Probably not."
Yeah.
Probably not. And so anyway, I do think that this is useful and interesting, given that a lot of learning has had to occur over the past year on the Democratic side of the nation's electorate for what does the Democratic Party look like that can contend with the Trump Republican juggernaut, right? And that, I think that's we're seeing it getting sorted out at everything from national level all the way down to hyper local level. And I do think that it's interesting. I'll just say it out loud. I think it's interesting that Zoran Mamdani, who comes from the Democratic Socialist kind of wing of the Democratic Party, which, to your point, it's Democratic Party, right? But this is a very progressive, very socialist leaning element, and there's a lot of commentary out there about it. So I'm interested to see how that kind of trickles into the national temperament or sentiment about the position and direction and evolution of the Democratic Party, because we need
the leading comment that I'll put on that, and I think it's one that everyone would do well to remember. There's a strong desire amongst Republicans and Democrats to select who our candidates are going to be and shape our party. But at the end of the day, the people quite literally get a vote. You don't, and I think there's a real exhaustion for the idea that the party control mechanisms get to determine this is what a Democrat is, this is what a Republican is, this is who you vote for. I think the cracks have really, and President Donald Trump is the best example of we're not, you can't always run that playbook.
Yeah.
The people have their say.
We've been learning that since 2014, 2015, when he really upended the apple cart. Well, okay, Simon the Democrat, thank you, and we are grateful for contributions. Brad, thanks for joining us this week.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
We're grateful for your time. Feel free to join us again. We would love to have you back. We have this rotating guest co-host seat that's always available. So if you ever just want to get on a riff,
good time. I appreciate it.
Cool. Okay. Happy Marine Corps birthday. Yeah. Happy birthday coming up, Marines, and 250 years and running. And we'll see you guys next time. Adios.